They called the cops on me for parking in my own driveway not knowing I am the law. It started with a yellow slip tucked under my windshield, violation, unauthorized vehicle in driveway. I stared at it baffled. The truck was mine. The driveway was mine. But this was Oak Ridge Estates, a place where the homeowners association believed rules were sacred scripture. My wife, Emily, sighed from the porch. They've been eyeing us since the moving truck came. We'd moved in just 2 weeks earlier, quiet cul-de-sac, manicured lawns and neighbors who waved without smiling. But I hadn't told anyone my job. Around here, Sheriff Jacob Rowe was just another homeowner that was about to change. The next morning, a woman in a pastel suit approached while I washed my truck. "Good morning, Mr. Rowe," she said crisply. "I'm Linda Myers, president of the Oak Ridge HOA. We need to discuss your vehicle." "Truck?" I asked, wiping the soap from my hands. "Yes," she said. "Commercial vehicles aren't permitted overnight. It brings down property values." I raised an eyebrow. "That's my personal vehicle," she smiled tightly. "We've already issued a notice. Further violations could result in fines or towing." Her tone wasn't neighborly. It was authoritative, the kind that came from people who'd never been told no. I didn't argue. I just nodded. But something in me clicked. I'd spent 20 years enforcing the law, and I knew a power trip when I saw one. 3 nights later, exhaustion clung to me like the diesel on my uniform. It had been another double shift, 2 arrests, a domestic dispute, and a paperwork stacked taller than a traffic cone. I pulled into my driveway just after 10, the engine rumbling low beneath the still night air. The neighborhood was dark and quiet. Oak Ridge always was, the kind of place that boasted about peaceful living on its website while neighbors spied through curtains. I killed the headlights and sat there for a moment, rubbing the bridge of my nose. I'd been county sheriff for 8 years. I'd broken up bar fights, led search warrants, and comforted grieving parents at 2 in the morning. But nothing wore me down like this place, the HOA, and its endless pettiness, like rot beneath a polished floorboard. At 10:42 p.m., the calm shattered. Red and blue lights spilled over the cul-de-sac, washing across mailboxes and manicured hedges. 2 patrol cars pulled up behind my truck, with their sirens tapering off into silence. For a second, I thought maybe something serious had happened nearby. But then Deputy Miller stepped out, head low, the beam from his flashlight cutting across my driveway. I got out slowly, confusion turning into disbelief. "Miller," I called out, "what's this?" He looked embarrassed, his hand on his belt radio. "Evening, Sheriff. We got a call from Oak Ridge HOA about a trespassing vehicle." Jaw tightened. "A what?" he sighed. "Caller said they saw a strange man parking a work truck after dark, thought it looked suspicious." I followed his gaze. My county-issued truck gleamed under the streetlight, marked with the official sheriff's emblem right on the door. I let out a slow breath, forcing calm. Across the street, a porch light flicked on. Linda, Oak Ridge HOA's self-appointed queen. She stood with her arms folded, her phone still glowing in her hand, lips tight in that smug little smirk she wore whenever she thought she'd won. I started walking toward her, boots crunching the gravel, the night air sharp with tension. The deputies exchanged awkward looks but didn't stop me. "Ma'am," I said evenly, pulling my badge from my jacket and clipping it to my belt so there was no mistaking it. "You just called the cops on the county sheriff." Her face drained of color like a candle flame snuffed out. The confidence evaporated, replaced by a stammering half-smile. "Well, I didn't know it was you. You were parking oddly and we've had incidents." I cut her off. "Incidents?" I gestured to my truck. "That's an official vehicle with my name on it, you know that. You've seen me drive it every day." Miller cleared his throat from behind me. "Sheriff, we, verified the plates. It's county issued." Linda tried to laugh it off. "Oh, it's just a misunderstanding. We're all trying to keep the neighborhood safe. You know how it is." "No," I said quietly, stepping closer until her smile faded. "This isn't about safety. It's about control. And you crossed the line tonight." For a long second, all she could do was stare. Her hand trembled slightly as she locked her phone screen like she'd realized the gravity of what she'd done. I turned to my deputies. "You can clear the call. I'll handle it from here." They nodded quickly and stepped back toward their cars. The lights dimmed, leaving only the dull glow of porch lamps and the heavy silence that followed. I looked back at Linda one last time. She tried to hold my gaze but couldn't. "Good night, ma'am," I said and walked away. Inside my house, the walls felt colder than usual. I set my badge down on the counter and stared out the front window, watching her silhouette retreat behind her curtains. Something told me this wasn't the end, not even close. That night I didn't sleep, not because of anger, but because of what I knew deep down. When people like Linda get embarrassed, they don't apologize, they escalate. The next morning the envelope was waiting for me, thick, white, and stamped certified mail in red. The kind of letter that never carried anything good. I tore it open over my kitchen counter, coffee still brewing behind me. Inside was a single page with the Oak Ridge HOA letterhead printed in pompous serif font. Sheriff Rowe, you are hereby requested to appear before the Oak Ridge Homeowners Association Board to discuss conduct unbecoming of a community member. Sincerely, Linda Porter, HOA Chairwoman. I let out a low chuckle. It wasn't even noon and they were already doubling down. These people truly didn't know when to stop. So I decided if they wanted a meeting, they'd get one. But this time, I wasn't coming as a homeowner. I showed up in full uniform, badge polished, sidearm holstered, boots shining like mirrors. When I pulled into the clubhouse lot, the same silver SUV that always parked across from my driveway was there, Linda's. Her HOA president decal glimmered proudly in the sunlight, as if it granted her some kind of royal authority. The clubhouse was a modest brick building with tall windows and fake colonial columns, a monument to petty control. I walked in through the glass doors at exactly 9:00 a.m. The moment I stepped inside, the chatter died. 5 board members sat around a long oak table, papers, coffee mugs, and thick binders of community policies spread out before them. All eyes turned to me. "Morning," I said, setting my campaign hat down gently on the table. The silence was thick enough to choke on. Linda adjusted her pearl necklace, her smile brittle. "Sheriff Rowe, thank you for coming. This isn't meant to be adversarial." "Oh," I said, pulling out a chair and sitting across from her. "It's already adversarial, Linda." Her face tightened. "We received several complaints regarding your vehicle, your presence late at night, and what some residents described as intimidating behavior." I leaned back in my chair. "You mean when I got home from work after a 16-hour shift and parked in my own driveway?" She cleared her throat. "There's a certain image Oak Ridge tries to maintain. Work trucks, especially with decals, tend to give off." "Decals?" I interrupted. "You mean my sheriff's department insignia?" A few board members shifted uncomfortably. One man, Mr. Adams, the treasurer, spoke softly. "Let's keep this civil." "I'm being perfectly civil," I said evenly, though my patience was running razor thin. "But what's not civil is calling in a false police report and wasting taxpayer-funded resources because someone doesn't like the look of a patrol truck." Linda straightened in her seat. "That's an unfair characterization. We acted on a perceived threat." I cut her off. "A perceived threat that happened to be your own county sheriff pulling into his home. You do realize that 2 of my deputies had to leave a domestic violence call to respond to your complaint, right?" Her mouth opened, then closed again. The room went still except for the faint hum of the overhead fan. I reached into my folder and pulled out a printed document, sliding it across the table. "Here," I said, calm but cold. "That's a formal warning issued to the Oak Ridge Homeowners Association for misuse of emergency services under County Ordinance 14-201B." The words hit like a gunshot. The board members leaned in, eyes wide. Linda blinked rapidly, her voice faltering. You're issuing us a citation. Not a citation, I said. A formal warning, first offense. If it happens again, I'll have to recommend penalties, including fines and possible suspension of your community's emergency privileges. What does that mean? Asked Mr. Adams, brow furrowed. It means, I said, meeting each of their eyes, if you keep weaponizing 911 for petty HOA vendettas, dispatch will start treating your calls as non-priority. Imagine needing real help, a break-in, a fire, and watching response time double because your board has a record of false reports. Silence. You could have heard the clock ticking. Finally, one of the older women at the end of the table, Mrs. Carlson, spoke up in a low voice. Linda, I told you we shouldn't have called. Linda shot her a glare. We have protocols, Margaret. Suspicious activity must be reported. I leaned forward. Suspicious activity. You watch me get out of that truck. You know who I am. You called anyway. That's not protocol, that's harassment. Her lips trembled slightly, and for a flicker of a moment, I saw something behind her eyes, fear, maybe shame, before pride shoved it back down. I'll admit, she said finally, things may have gotten misinterpreted, but perhaps, Sheriff, you could have handled the situation more discreetly. You didn't need to confront me in front of the neighbors. I smiled faintly. You made a public scene. I gave you a public correction. The man beside her, the HOA vice chair, rubbed his temples. Linda, maybe we should just drop this. It's getting out of hand. No, she snapped, voice rising. He's trying to intimidate us. I stayed quiet, letting the echo of her words hang. The irony didn't need my help. Then I stood, sliding the chair back slowly. This meeting is over, I said firmly. I've said what needed saying. You've been warned. Next time I won't bring paperwork. I'll bring county legal counsel. Linda's lips parted in disbelief. You can't. I can, I said, picking up my hat. And I will. You see, when an HOA crosses from community management into interference with law enforcement, it stops being neighborhood policy and starts being obstruction. I turned to leave, pausing just before the door. One more thing, I said over my shoulder. If you have a problem with how I park, you can take it up with the county office, but I wouldn't recommend it. The last person who tried that ended up with a zoning audit. The quiet gasp that followed was almost satisfying. As I stepped outside, the crisp morning air hit me like a release. Birds were chirping. Sprinklers ticked across manicured lawns. It was the same perfect neighborhood facade, all order, all control, but I could feel the shift underneath it now. Inside that clubhouse, the illusion had cracked. Linda Porter had finally realized she picked a fight she couldn't control with fines or neighborhood gossip. By the time I reached my truck, my phone buzzed with a text from Miller. Heard about the meeting. You good? I smiled, starting the engine. Better than ever, I replied. They just got their first warning, won't be their last. I drove off. I caught a glimpse of Linda through the window, standing stiffly, staring after me. Her expression wasn't anger anymore. It was calculation. And I knew that look well. I'd seen it on suspects before the next move, the desperate kind who couldn't stand losing control. Oak Ridge had just declared war. Only this time I wasn't just their neighbor. I was the Law W. Power doesn't surrender quietly. It never has. By Monday morning, Oak Ridge had drawn its first line. 3 violation letters were taped neatly to my front door, laminated like trophies against the dew. 1. Grass exceeding height limit by 2 inches. 2. Trash bins visible from street view. 3. Unapproved mailbox color, shade not compliant with HOA palette. The last one made me laugh out loud. My mailbox had been county standard gray for 5 years, the same color used at the post office. But the more I read, the less funny it became. Each notice came with a fine. $150, $75, and $200 respectively. $425 in total, for infractions that barely existed. It wasn't about rules anymore. It was about punishment. When Emily came downstairs that morning, she found me sitting at the table, the letters spread out in front of me like evidence at a crime scene. Her hair was still damp from the shower, robe pulled tight, eyes tired from too many restless nights. "You're not still thinking about them, are you?" she asked softly. "I don't have to think about them," I said. "They're right here." I slid the papers toward her. She read the first few lines, frowned, then set them down. "This is ridiculous. They're baiting you." I nodded slowly. "That's the point. They want me angry enough to slip up, maybe yell at a meeting, maybe give them something they can record and use against me." "Then don't," she said, her voice pleading. "Let it go. They'll calm down eventually." But I'd seen this before, not in homeowners' meetings, but in interrogation rooms. The pattern was always the same. People like Linda didn't back off when you ignored them. They pushed harder until they believed they'd won. I wasn't going to give her that satisfaction. So I didn't retaliate, not outwardly, not yet. I mowed the lawn, tucked the trash bins behind the fence, and left the mailbox exactly as it was. But that night, after Emily had gone to bed, I poured myself a coffee, sat down at my desk, and opened my laptop. If the HOA wanted a fight, I'd bring it by the book. First stop, public records. Every homeowners association in the county was required to file annual budgets, board rosters, and contractor payments. All of it was public information, tucked away in databases few residents even knew existed. I knew exactly where to look. The Oak Ridge filings went back 15 years, dry spreadsheets and PDFs stacked in a digital archive. At first glance, everything looked routine: landscaping contracts, maintenance fees, water bills. But as I read deeper, I noticed patterns that didn't make sense. Same vendor names, same signatures, slightly different addresses. A company called Greensun Property Maintenance received $18,000 annually for grounds upkeep. Another, Harper Ridge Consulting, billed $9,500 for legal review and community advisement. I recognized the Harper Ridge address. It matched a P.O. box listed under Linda Porter's name from her last campaign for the HOA board. I sat back, heart thudding. I'd seen this before in fraud cases. Fake companies, redirected payments, circular billing. They were using the HOA as a personal cash machine. I spent hours cross-referencing every contractor listed in the filings. By 2 a.m., I had a spreadsheet full of duplicate addresses, reused EIN numbers, and overlapping phone contacts, all leading back to either Linda or her husband, Gary Porter. Gary was a local contractor, small-time, specialized in community maintenance projects. I remembered his face from a permit hearing 2 years back: slick hair, expensive watch, handshake that lasted too long. It clicked. The Porters were funneling HOA money through shell companies and contractors that didn't exist beyond a mailbox and a receipt book. Every homeowner's dues, hundreds of families paying monthly, were being siphoned into their personal accounts. I scrolled through another PDF and froze. There it was, a $6,200 charge labeled Lake Erosion Management Special Assessment Fund. Oak Ridge didn't have a lake erosion problem. It didn't even have a lake. They invented a project. And that wasn't all. Attached was a signed approval document from the chairwoman. Linda's signature looped across the page in her distinct, arrogant cursive. For a few seconds, I just stared at the screen. All those HOA memos, those smug letters, the power trips, it wasn't just about control. It was about money, about greed dressed up as community order. I saved every document, every receipt, every duplicate entry. Then I made copies, one for my records, one for the county auditor. But I didn't submit them yet. I wanted to understand how deep it went. Over the next 3 nights, I kept digging, During the day, I smiled at neighbors, nodded at the board members when I passed them, and kept mowing my too tall grass. At night, I built my case quietly, methodically. The more I uncovered, the darker it got. The Porters landscaping company billed Oak Ridge for projects that never happened, repaving paths that had never been torn up, painting fences that hadn't been touched in years. Even worse, there were 3 separate invoices labeled Security Camera Upgrade HOA Surveillance Network. But there were no cameras. I checked every corner of the neighborhood. Nothing new had been installed. $16,000 had simply disappeared. When I brought this up to Miller the next morning over coffee at the station, he raised an eyebrow. "You sure you want to be the one digging into this, Sheriff? Sounds like a conflict of interest." "Maybe," I said, "but if I don't, no one will. And this isn't about petty citations anymore. This is embezzlement." He nodded slowly. "You think Linda knows you're onto her?" "She will soon," I said, "and when she does, she'll hit back." That night, I found another letter waiting for me. This one wasn't taped to the door, it was hand-delivered. "Sheriff Rowe, you are hereby notified that due to continued noncompliance with HOA bylaws, Oak Ridge will be reviewing your residency status. Failure to comply may result in property liens or legal action." I almost laughed again. Reviewing your residency status. Sounded like they thought they could evict the sheriff. Emily found me standing in the doorway, the letter in hand, rain starting to fall outside. "What now?" she whispered. I looked at her, then at the darkened street where Linda's porch light glowed like a lighthouse of arrogance. "Now," I said, folding the letter neatly and sliding it into my folder of evidence. "We play it their way, just slower, quieter, and with a lot more teeth." Because I wasn't just a homeowner anymore. I was the man who'd seen their books, followed their money, and understood exactly how far they'd gone. The HOA thought they could bury me in fines and paperwork. They had no idea, they just handed me the shovel that would bury them instead. And as the rain started tapping against the window, I sat back down at my desk, opened a blank report form, and typed the first words that would start the end of Oak Ridge's reign of control. Preliminary findings: potential financial misconduct by Oak Ridge Homeowners Association. By the time I hit save, the neighborhood was quiet again. Too quiet, I knew they retaliate harder next, but this time I wasn't reacting, I was hunting. The deeper I dug, the uglier it got. Oak Ridge had always sold itself as a model community. Every newsletter bragged about its balanced budget, efficient spending, and transparent governance. But when I finally tore into the HOA's books line by line, vendor by vendor, I realized there was nothing transparent about it. It was a curtain, and behind it, Linda Myers had built her own empire. The first red flag was subtle, a few payments here and there, labeled contractor fees and grounds restoration. The numbers weren't outrageous individually, but collectively they bled the maintenance fund dry. Nearly $40,000 over the past 2 years. I followed the trail. Each payment went to a vendor named Silver Lawn Maintenance Group, listed as a local contractor for landscaping and seasonal repair. But when I checked the state registry, there was no record of such a company. No license, no tax ID, no address. That alone would have been suspicious. But when I ran the banking data, the account number used for payment deposits, it looped back to something that made my blood run cold. Recipient: G. Myers Construction. Registered owner: Gary Myers, Linda's husband. The contractor fees weren't just phantom transactions, they were direct kickbacks. It wasn't just unethical, it was criminal. I leaned back in my chair, heart pounding in the low hum of my home office. Outside, rain tapped the window like a metronome, counting down the seconds before the storm hit in full. Linda had used her position as HOA chair to funnel community funds into her own household, hiding it behind fake vendor names. And she'd gotten away with it for years, right under everyone's noses. I started printing every page, every budget ledger, every payment log, every check image I could find. I made sure the timestamps were visible, the account trails clear. Then I drove straight to the notary office downtown before it closed. The clerk recognized me instantly, being the county sheriff came with its perks. "Bit late for paperwork, isn't it?" she joked lightly. "Just keeping things official," I said, handing her the folder. She stamped and sealed each page without a question. By the time I walked back out to my truck, the folder was heavy in my hands, heavy not just with paper but with proof. Proof that Oak Ridge's respectable leadership had been stealing from its own residents. I didn't drive home right away. Instead, I sat in the cab for a long time, watching headlights smear across the wet pavement, trying to calm the anger pulsing through me. I'd spent my career chasing people who broke laws out of desperation, addicts, thieves, people backed into corners. But Linda and Gary weren't desperate. They were entitled. And entitlement, I'd learned, was far more dangerous. I dialed the number for the county attorney's office. "Evening, Sheriff," came the voice on the other end. "What can I do for you?" "I've got something you'll want to see," I said. "Possible misuse of community funds, fraud, maybe embezzlement. Documents are notarized and verified." Was a pause. "From where?" "Oak Ridge Homeowners Association." Pause longer this time. I could almost hear the attorney's pen stop moving. "That's unusual. You sure you want to get involved in that, Sheriff?" I smiled grimly. "Already am," he said finally. "Bring the documents by first thing in the morning. We'll review and file for a preliminary audit." But I didn't wait until morning. By 7 p.m. I was in his office, handing over the sealed folder. He skimmed the pages, his brows knitting tighter with every flip. When he finally looked up, there was no more doubt in his expression, only concern. "This isn't small," he said quietly. "They've been falsifying budgets, moving money through dummy companies. It'll trigger an audit, no question." "Good," I said, "because they've been using the HOA like a private bank." He nodded. "We'll authorize an official financial review tonight. County auditors will contact you if they need verification. You'll be kept out of the direct investigation, obviously, for conflict reasons." "That's fine," I said. "I just want it done right." When I left the courthouse, the storm had finally broken. Rain hammered against the pavement, washing over everything like some kind of divine rinse. For the first time in weeks, I felt a strange calm beneath the fatigue. For once, the word authority didn't belong to the HOA, it belonged to the law. The next day, word spread faster than I expected. By noon, several residents had received letters from the county requesting verification of HOA dues and special assessments. The whispers started immediately, curious neighbors at mailboxes, text messages lighting up group chats. Linda must have realized something was wrong by mid-afternoon, because by 3 o'clock her SUV was parked outside my house again. She didn't knock. She just sat there, engine running, staring at my driveway like she could intimidate me from 20 feet away. Emily peeked through the blinds. "She's out there again." I set my coffee down, steadying my breath. "Let her sit. She's waiting for me to blink first." A few minutes later, her SUV peeled away, tires hissing on the wet street. By that evening, I got a call from one of the county auditors, Sheriff Rowe. "Just wanted to confirm some details. We've cross-checked your documents, looks like you were right. The association's main account has 2 auxiliary transfers leading to a personal account under Gary Meyer's name. We'll be freezing activity pending investigation." I exhaled, tension easing from my shoulders. "Good work. Keep it quiet for now. They'll start covering tracks the moment they know." The auditor hesitated. "That may already be happening. Someone tried to access the records database twice this morning using admin credentials." "Linda," I muttered. But what she didn't realize was that everything she was trying to erase I'd already copied. Every PDF, every timestamp, every transaction log. She could delete the surface, but the trail was buried deeper than she could reach. That night, as I filed my final report notes, I caught my reflection in the dark window. I looked older somehow, maybe from the lack of sleep, or maybe from seeing yet another example of corruption hiding behind respectability. Oak Ridge had been marketed as a sanctuary, a pristine neighborhood built on shared values and community integrity. What it really was a front, a place where greed wore a smile and control hid behind bylaws. But not anymore, because the moment that audit was authorized, the balance shifted. The HOA's endless meetings, its threats and citations, its constant power plays, they all suddenly meant nothing. Linda's kingdom had been built on paper and fear. And I just pulled the paper out from under her. Later that evening, Miller called. "Heard the county looking into Oak Ridge," he said cautiously. "Yeah," I replied. "Audit's active. Guess she's not too happy about that." "Be furious," I said, "and desperate." He paused. "What's your move now?" I looked down at the folder of notarized evidence still on my desk. "Now I wait, let the law work for once." Outside, lightning flashed across the sky, illuminating the perfectly trimmed hedges of Oak Ridge, that artificial perfection the HOA prided itself on. But beneath that glow I could feel it, the beginning of collapse. For years, Linda Myers had used fear to keep her grip on this community. Letters, fines, rules, threats. Now the fear was hers. And as the rain began to fall again, I allowed myself one small, quiet thought, a warning I knew she'd soon understand better than anyone. When you build power on lies, the truth doesn't just expose you, it buries you. They came at dawn, the kind of morning where the mist hangs low over the street, thick enough to muffle sound but not judgment. 3 unmarked sedans rolled into the subdivision, followed by a county SUV with emergency lights dimmed to a steady amber glow. My deputies stepped out first, quiet and professional, no fanfare. Behind them were 2 investigators from the county attorney's office, clipboards, cameras, and sealed evidence boxes in hand. By the time the first garage door opened, the news had already spread. Curtains twitched, coffee cups froze midair. Everyone in Maple Glen had heard about something, but they didn't know this was what it looked like when the hammer finally fell. They walked straight to the HOA clubhouse. The padlocked door was opened under warrant authority. Inside, a scent of stale coffee and toner filled the air. My deputies began cataloging every file, every binder, every loose receipt. It wasn't the kind of chaos Linda Myers could talk her way out of, not this time. I stood by the entryway, arms crossed, watching as the forensic accountant popped open the small gray safe behind the boardroom painting. Inside, cash envelopes labeled Maintenance Reserve, all marked with months that had already been paid on paper. Linda stumbled out of her house barefoot, wrapped in a bathrobe that looked more like a costume than comfort. Her hair was unbrushed, her voice hoarse but sharp. "You can't do this," she shouted, storming up the clubhouse steps. "You have no right to be here." I turned to her slowly, holding up the folded document in my hand. "Oh, we can," I said evenly. "And we will. You might want to read the Seal County Attorney's Office, signed and notarized." For the first time since this all began, Linda didn't have a comeback. Her mouth opened, then closed again, like she was trying to find footing in a flood. The investigators didn't even look at her. They were already photographing ledgers, scanning invoices, and labeling drives. The quiet murmur of printers, pens scratching, and camera shutters filled the clubhouse. Every sound was evidence. Every silence was guilt. Neighbors began to gather. Some stood in driveways clutching mugs. Others whispered from behind fences. People who'd once cowered before the HOA board now looked at Linda like a dethroned monarch. The same woman who fined them for non-uniform hedges was now being read her rights. The county investigator called me over to a folding table stacked with files. "Sheriff, take a look at this," she said, pointing to a ledger entry. "They created a community beautification fund. Transfers every month but no vendor receipts." I nodded. "How much?" She tapped her pen against the column. $87,000 gone. I exhaled slowly. "That's not beautification," I said. "That's theft." Linda's husband tried to intervene later that morning, pulling into the cul-de-sac in a pickup truck loaded with boxes. When he saw the cruisers, his face drained of color. "This is private property," he barked, but his voice cracked halfway through. "Not when it's under criminal investigation," I said, stepping between him and the clubhouse. "You might want to save that line for your attorney." He hesitated, then turned and drove off, tires spitting gravel. He didn't get far. 2 deputies followed him to his office. By noon, half the neighborhood was outside. Someone brought folding chairs. Kids on bikes rode by pretending to be news reporters. For the first time since the HOA had formed, people were smiling. Inside, the audit team was relentless. They found fake contractor invoices, personal Amazon purchases charged to the security fund, and even HOA payments covering vacations to Florida. The irony was almost poetic. All those fines, all those warnings, and this was where their money went. Around 3 p.m., I got the call I'd been waiting for. The county attorney's voice was calm, clipped, and final. "Sheriff, proceed with the suspension of the board under Section 12.14 of the Community Governance Code. They'll be removed pending full investigation." "Yes, ma'am," I replied. When I walked back outside, the sun was high, cutting through the fog that had hidden everything that morning. I gathered the board, what was left of them, in front of the clubhouse. Linda tried one last act of defiance, crossing her arms. "You think you can just take over," she said. "This community needs leadership." I met her gaze. "Then it's about time it gets some." With that, I read the official notice of suspension. Every word echoed through the quiet cul-de-sac. Her face reddened, jaw trembling, but she said nothing. As the board members were escorted off the premises, a round of soft applause broke out from the neighbors, hesitant at first, then louder. The sound rolled down the street like a release of years' worth of fear and frustration. By sundown, the HOA's accounts were frozen. Every email, every log entry, every transaction was in county custody. The clubhouse was sealed under evidence tape. And as the last investigator packed up her files, she turned to me and said, "You don't see justice like this often in these neighborhoods. Usually, they get away with it." "Not this time," I said quietly, watching the sun dip behind the row of manicured homes. That night, for the first time in months, the streets of Maple Glen were silent. No warning letters, no patrols with flashlights checking driveways, no fines taped to mailboxes. Just the sound of sprinklers and crickets. Linda's kingdom had fallen, and the people she once ruled were finally free to breathe again. But I knew one thing: power like hers didn't disappear overnight. It regrouped. It planned. And somewhere behind a dark window on Cedar Court, I was certain she was already plotting her next move. By the next morning, Oak Ridge Estates was on every local news channel. Helicopters hovered overhead, and reporters with wind-blown hair stood in front of the freshly taped clubhouse, rehearsing their exclusive openings. "Authorities executed a warrant early this morning," one said into her mic, uncovering what sources describe as widespread financial misconduct within the Oak Ridge Estates Homeowners Association. The image cut to footage of deputies walking out with evidence boxes, some marked financial records, others electronic storage. And then there I was, in uniform, standing beside the county investigator. I hadn't planned to be on camera, but part of me was glad the truth was finally public. By 10 a.m., my phone was flooded, texts from neighbors, county officials, even other HOAs asking what exactly happened. For years, Linda Myers had portrayed herself as the guardian of order, a woman who protected property values with the zeal of a small-town monarch. She fined retirees for having mismatched curtains, forced veterans to remove flagpoles, and made single mothers cry over unpaid decorative shrub fees. Now she was the headline. "Local HOA president under investigation for fraud," read the banner scrolling across the morning broadcast. By noon, Linda resigned. No speech, no statement, just a single-page email sent to every homeowner. Effective immediately, I hereby resign as president of the Oak Ridge Estates Homeowners Association. Due to personal reasons, I will no longer be participating in community affairs. The same woman who used to patrol the neighborhood at dawn with a clipboard now couldn't even step outside. Her husband wasn't as lucky. Deputies arrested him that afternoon at his office downtown. The local contractors registry confirmed it. The company that handled maintenance contracts for Oak Ridge Estates didn't exist. He'd funneled over $80,000 in dues into personal accounts under the guise of landscaping, security cameras, and amenity upgrades. When word broke, the neighborhood erupted not in anger but in relief. People came out of their homes for the first time without fear of being fined for standing too close to the curb. Kids rode bikes without helmets, dogs barked freely, and no one complained. It was like watching color return to a picture that had been drained of life for years. That evening, the interim board gathered for its first meeting in the clubhouse. It was surreal walking into that same room, the one where I'd once been accused of misconduct, now filled with honest faces instead of power-drunk bureaucrats. There were 7 of us, homeowners, veterans, retirees, young parents, real people. Not one of them looked like they'd ever cared about mailbox paint codes. Sandra from Maple Lane spoke first. First order of business, abolish the driveway parking ban. The room broke into applause. Someone actually whistled. Then came the trash bin rule, the grass height ordinance, and the holiday decor approval clause. By the time we were done, half the HOA's rulebook was slashed and tossed into a recycling bin. It wasn't rebellion, it was restoration. Outside, the air felt lighter. People who used to avert their eyes when passing now waved. Some brought cookies to deputies stationed nearby as a thank you. It was awkward, but heartfelt, a community remembering how to be one. Later that evening, as the sun set behind the cul-de-sac, I stood by my truck, the same one Linda had tried to tow, and watched as families gathered at the park. Someone lit a small grill. Kids played tag between the trees. The neighborhood was alive again. Emily joined me, resting a hand on my shoulder. "You did it," she said softly. I shook my head. "We all did. They just needed someone to remind them that rules aren't supposed to choke people." She smiled faintly. "Still feels good seeing her gone." But I'd be lying if I said I didn't feel a strange emptiness, to the kind that comes after a long fight. You spend months bracing for battle, and then one morning it's over. The silence feels almost foreign. Over the next few days, the story spread beyond our county. Other neighborhoods called, asking how to audit their own HOAs. Some local radio hosts dubbed it the Oak Ridge Rebellion. A few even joked about electing me to run a sheriff's HOA where the only rules were be decent and mow when you can. The truth was simpler. It wasn't about revenge. It was about fairness. Linda and her husband faced charges for fraud and misappropriation of funds. Their accounts were frozen, their influence erased. For once, justice didn't just visit Oak Ridge Estates, it moved in. Weeks later, the county attorney's office sent me a formal thank you letter, recognizing my cooperation during the investigation. It was neatly typed, bureaucratic and emotionless, but I didn't need sentiment. Watching that neighborhood reclaim itself was enough. One morning, while grabbing my mail, I noticed something different. The street was quiet, not tense. A teenager waved at me while washing his car in his driveway. An elderly couple tended to their roses without fear of being out of compliance. The oppressive hum of Linda's regime had vanished. Standing there, the breeze warm and clean, I realized something. For years, Oak Ridge Estates had been a place people moved to escape chaos. But under Linda's rule, it had become the very thing it feared, a prison disguised as perfection. Now, it was just home. And as the evening settled in, lights flickering on across porches that had long been dimmed by fear, I finally exhaled. Peace didn't come from a badge or an arrest warrant or a board vote. It came from the simple sound of neighbors talking again freely, fearlessly. For the first time in years, Oak Ridge Estates wasn't under control. It was under care. It was a quiet Sunday morning when the knock came. The kind that wasn't firm or rhythmic, just hesitant, uneven, like the person on the other side wasn't sure they should be there at all. I opened the door expecting a delivery or a lost visitor. Instead, there she was, Linda Myers. Her once meticulously styled hair was pulled back in a shaky bun. The woman who used to strut around Oak Ridge like a warden now looked smaller, deflated. Her eyes were sunken, her voice brittle when she finally spoke. "Sheriff Rowe," she began, clutching a worn leather purse like it might protect her. I just wanted to talk." It took me a moment to respond. I hadn't seen her since the day she resigned. I'd thought maybe she'd moved away, gone to stay with relatives until the investigation blew over. Seeing her there, on my porch, felt almost surreal. "Linda," I said slowly, "what brings you here?" She swallowed, her eyes darting to the neighborhood beyond me, to the kids playing down the street, to the families setting up their weekend yard sales, to the small community that had finally begun to breathe again. "I just wanted to keep the neighborhood perfect," she said, voice trembling. "I thought if I enforced the rules, if I made people care, it would stay beautiful, safe." Her gaze dropped to the floor. "I didn't mean for it to go this far." I studied her. It would have been easy to feel pity, and part of me did. But I also remembered the flashing red and blue lights in front of my house, the humiliation she'd tried to cause, the way she'd weaponized authority against anyone who didn't bow to her. "Perfection doesn't come from control," I said quietly. "It comes from respect." She nodded slowly, tears gathering in her eyes. "I know that now. Believe me, I do. I lost everything, the house, the trust, even my friends. No one in Oak Ridge will talk to me. I just wanted to apologize for what I did to you, to everyone." Breeze carried the faint scent of freshly cut grass, ironic, I thought, given how many fines she'd written for it. "Do you have any idea how many people you hurt?" I asked. My tone wasn't cruel, but it was firm. "The retirees who paid your bogus fees, the young couple you embarrassed for leaving a stroller on their porch, the veterans you fined for flying their flags." Her shoulders quivered. "I know," she whispered. "I told myself it was for order, for peace, but it was about control. I see that now. I thought power would earn respect. It didn't." Silence stretched between us. Only the sound of the wind chimes breaking it. She wiped her cheek with the back of her hand. "I'm sorry, Sheriff." For a moment I considered how to answer. The easy thing would have been to accept the apology, close the chapter cleanly. But something in me needed her to understand that what she'd done wasn't just against me, it was against the very idea of community. "I'm not your sheriff," I said softly, meeting her eyes. "I'm just your neighbor, and neighbors look out for each other. They don't rule each other." She nodded slowly, eyes glossy. "I'll remember that, I promise." "Good," I said. "Then treat people right next time." She gave a small, broken smile, the first real one I'd ever seen from her. Then she turned and walked down the steps, her shoes crunching softly against the gravel. As she reached the end of the path, she paused. "You know," she said over her shoulder, "for what it's worth, Oak Ridge looks better now, happier. You were right." I didn't respond. I just watched as she walked away, head bowed, steps slow, disappearing down the street she once claimed to own. After she was gone, I stood there for a while, listening to the neighborhood's quiet hum. The laughter of children, the sound of a lawnmower 2 houses over, a dog barking at nothing in particular. It wasn't perfect, but it was alive, and that was enough. Emily came to the doorway behind me, resting her chin on my shoulder. "Was that who I think it was?" she asked. "Yeah," I said. "She came to apologize." Emily exhaled softly. "Guess even control freaks have a conscience." "Maybe," I said, watching the street where Linda had vanished. "Or maybe she just finally felt what it's like to be powerless." For the rest of the afternoon, I couldn't shake the image of her, not the version who barked orders or scribbled citations, but the one who stood trembling on my porch, stripped of pride. It was strange how people could change when the mask fell. A week later, a letter appeared in my mailbox. No return address, just a small note inside. "Thank you for not yelling. I didn't deserve your kindness. Maybe someday I'll be a good neighbor too." Eli folded the note carefully and set it in the kitchen drawer. Not as a trophy, but as a reminder that even the ones who cause the most chaos sometimes crumble, not from punishment, but from truth. That night, as dusk settled over Oak Ridge, I stepped out onto my porch again. The streetlights flickered on one by one, casting a soft amber glow. For the first time since moving here, I realized something simple and profound. Peace isn't the absence of conflict. It's the moment you stop letting fear and ego dictate how you live. I closed the door gently behind me, letting the house fall quiet. The war with the HOA was finally over, and this time the silence didn't feel heavy. It felt earned. It was early spring when I finally felt at peace. Not the kind you force, not the kind you defend with a badge or paperwork, but the quiet sort that just settles into a place when it's finally done fighting. The morning sun stretched long across the cul-de-sac, painting everything in warm gold. I parked my truck exactly where it had all started, in my driveway. Same spot. Same crack in the concrete I'd meant to fix years ago but never did. No flashing lights. No violation slips taped to my door. No nervous glances from neighbors afraid to wave. Just silence and birdsong. For a moment I sat there, engine ticking softly as it cooled. The neighborhood looked different now, not in its structure, but in its spirit. Yards weren't identical anymore. One family had built a small wooden swing in their front lawn. Another had painted their door bright red, something Linda's old rulebook would have forbidden under non-neutral tones. Now no one cared, and the world hadn't ended. The screen door creaked open behind me. Emily stepped out, 2 steaming mugs of coffee in hand. She wore one of my old flannel shirts and a smile that made the entire scene feel real. "Still feels strange without their letters," she said, handing me a cup. I took it, feeling the warmth seep into my hands. Best kind of strange there is. We stood there for a while, just listening. The faint sound of kids laughing drifted from across the street. The Jenkins boys were setting up an old slip-in slide on the grass, a sight that would have earned them a $100 fine last summer. Now no one stopped them. The neighborhood that once looked perfect but felt suffocating now looked a little messy, but alive. A tricycle left in the yard, a flag fluttering proudly from a porch post, someone blasting an old country song from their garage while washing a car. It was beautiful in its imperfection. I glanced at the patch of grass near the curb where an HOA sign used to stand. "Driveway parking prohibited after 9 p.m. Violators will be towed." Now there was nothing but dirt and dandelions. I liked it better that way. "You ever think about how close we came to moving?" Emily asked, sipping her coffee. I nodded slowly. "Every day I almost sold the place. Figured no home was worth that much stress." She looked at me over her mug. "And now," I smiled faintly, "now it's worth every bit of the fight." A delivery van passed by. No one chased it down for unauthorized commercial presence. 2 teens walked their dog off-leash, and the world didn't collapse. It was the same street, but somehow it breathed differently now, as if the air itself had forgiven everyone. Later that day, a few neighbors came by. Small talk, casual conversation, laughter. The kind of human connection that had been absent for too long. Mrs. Delaney, the widow who lived 2 doors down, brought over a pie. "It's blueberry," she said with a shy smile. "Baked it myself. First time I've had the courage to invite anyone since." "Well, you know." I chuckled softly. "Thank you, ma'am. I think we all deserve a fresh start." As she walked back across the street, I noticed something that made me pause. The community bulletin board, once littered with citations and meeting notices, now held something else. Kids' drawings, handwritten thank you notes to deputies, flyers for a neighborhood barbecue. Oak Ridge Estates had turned a corner. And as much as the sheriff in me appreciated the justice served, the neighbor in me appreciated the humanity that had returned. That evening, after dinner, I walked outside again. The sky had turned to deep amber, and the hum of crickets filled the air. My truck gleamed under the porch light, not as a symbol of authority, but as a reminder of resilience. Emily leaned against the doorframe, watching me. "You love that spot, don't you?" she teased. I grinned. "I guess I do. Took a war to earn it." She laughed softly, shaking her head. "Well, you won, and now you get to park wherever you damn well please." I looked out over the quiet street and felt something rare: contentment. The kind that doesn't announce itself, just settles quietly in your bones. Across the street, where the old HOA sign once stood, the Jenkins little girl had planted a small flower bed. Bright marigolds swaying gently in the evening breeze. Above them, someone had placed a handmade wooden sign that read, "Welcome, neighbor." That one word, neighbor, carried more power than any rulebook ever could. I took another sip of coffee, now cold, and smiled. Every fight, every late-night call, every petty fine and false report, it had all led to this. Not a victory parade, not revenge, but something quieter, deeper, balance. Because sometimes justice isn't loud. Sometimes it's not about courtrooms or handcuffs. Sometimes it's as simple as parking your truck in your own driveway without fear. As the stars blinked awake above Oak Ridge, I set my mug on the hood and leaned back against the fender. The same driveway that had once been a battlefield was now just home. And every time I saw that spot, I remembered sometimes the law doesn't need to knock. Sometimes it just parks exactly where it belongs. And this time it wasn't just me who'd earned that peace. It was all of Oak Ridge.